I never thought I'd find myself in this situation. I, Sarah, a 28-year-old woman who always considered herself loyal and honest, now find myself trapped in a web of lies and desire that threatens to destroy everything I've built. It all began 6 months ago. My boyfriend, Tom, and I had been together for 5 years. We had plans, shared dreams. We talked about marriage, buying a house, even having children someday. But the truth is, our relationship had become predictable, monotonous. The spark that once burned so intensely had been reduced to a faint glow. Don't get me wrong, I loved Tom. He's a good man, hardworking, responsible. But lately, I felt like something was missing. That excitement, that adrenaline I used to feel when we were together had faded. I told myself it was normal, that all relationships have ups and downs. But deep down, a part of me longed for something more. It was then that our life took an unexpected turn. One night, while we were having dinner, we noticed a leak in the kitchen ceiling. At first, we didn't give it much importance, but as days passed, it became evident that we needed urgent repairs. Tom, always practical, suggested we hire a professional. "I know someone," he said, "a friend of a co-worker. He's a contractor and does all kinds of repairs. They say he's very good and his prices are reasonable." I nodded, not imagining how that simple decision would change the course of our lives. The day Jake, the contractor, arrived at our house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time, a jolt of excitement. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with an easy smile and green eyes that seemed to penetrate to the soul. His presence filled the room in a way I couldn't explain. "Good morning," he said in a deep, melodious voice. "I'm Jake, I'm here about the repair." I stammered a greeting, suddenly feeling shy. Jake examined the leak, moving his athletic body with a grace that left me breathless. He explained what needed to be done, his voice full of confidence and knowledge. I found myself nodding to everything he said, hypnotized by his movements and the way he spoke. The following days were sweet torture. Jake came early and left late, working diligently on the repair. I worked from home, so we spent a lot of time in the same space. At first, our interactions were purely professional. He consulted me about details of the work. I offered him coffee or water from time to time, but little by little, something began to change. Our conversations became more personal. We talked about our likes, our dreams, our disappointments. Jake had a way of listening that made me feel truly seen and understood. When he talked about his passion for his work, his eyes shone in a way that fascinated me. I caught myself dressing up more in the mornings, carefully choosing my clothes before he arrived. I found myself looking for excuses to be in the same room as him. Watching how his muscles tensed under his t-shirt while he worked one afternoon, while Jake was repairing a wall, I approached to offer him a glass of water. Our hands brushed when I handed him the glass, and I felt an electric shock run through my entire body. Our eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. I saw in his eyes a desire that reflected my own. "Thank you, Sarah," he said quietly, without taking his gaze from mine. "You're very kind." I blushed and mumbled something incoherent before hurrying away. My heart was pounding, and my mind was a whirlwind of confused emotions. What was happening to me? I had a boyfriend I loved. Why did I feel this way about another man? That night, when Tom came home, I tried to act normal. But as we had dinner and he told me about his day, my mind wandered. I unconsciously compared Tom to Jake. Where Tom was soft and comfortable, Jake was exciting and new. Where Tom was predictable, Jake was a mystery to uncover. I felt guilty about these thoughts, but I couldn't help them. The routine I once found comforting now seemed suffocating. Tom's little quirks that I used to find adorable now irritated me. I hated myself for feeling this way, but I couldn't deny it. Something had changed. Days passed, and the tension between Jake and me grew. Our glances lasted longer than necessary. Our accidental brushes became more frequent. Every time we were alone, I could feel the electricity in the air, the barely contained desire. Afternoon, Tom called to tell me he'd be late. He had an important meeting and then would go for drinks with his colleagues. I felt relieved and guilty at the same time. Relieved because I wouldn't have to pretend normalcy. Guilty because I knew a part of me longed to be alone with Jake. That afternoon, while Jake was working in the bathroom, I went in to ask if he needed anything. I found him shirtless, beads of sweat purling his muscular chest. Our eyes met in the mirror, and I saw in his eyes the same fire that burned in mine. "Sarah," he said in a husky voice, turning towards me. "I think we both know what's going on here." My heart was beating so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. "Jake, we can't," I whispered, but my feet betrayed me, moving closer to him instead of away. "Why not?" he asked, closing the distance between us. "Don't you feel it? This connection between us, it's undeniable." We were so close I could feel the heat of his body, smell his scent of soap and sweat. My hands were shaking. My breathing was ragged. I knew I should step away, that I should be strong, but my body wouldn't respond. "I have a boyfriend," I managed to say, but it sounded weak even to my own ears. "I know," Jake replied, his hand gently brushing my cheek. "And I know this is wrong, but I can't help what I feel for you, Sarah. And I think you feel the same." At that moment, all my resistance crumbled. Our lips met in a passionate, urgent kiss, releasing all the tension built up over weeks. His hands roamed my body with an intensity that left me breathless, and I found myself responding with equal fervor. What followed was a whirlwind of unbridled passion and desire. We gave ourselves to each other right there, in the half-remodeled bathroom, not caring about anything but the present moment. It was intense, fiery, forbidden. It was everything I had been yearning for and more. Afterwards, as we lay on the floor, panting and sweaty, reality began to set in. What had I done? How could I betray Tom like this? Guilt hit me like a sledgehammer, threatening to crush me. This can't happen again," I said, hurriedly getting up and fixing my clothes. Jake looked at me with a mixture of desire and understanding. "I get it," he said softly. "But Sarah, what just happened? It wasn't just lust. There's something real between us." I shook my head, refusing to listen. "No, Jake, it was a mistake. I love Tom. This never happened. Understand?" I rushed out of the bathroom, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. I spent the rest of the afternoon avoiding Jake, immersed in a spiral of guilt and confusion. That night, when Tom came home, I could barely look him in the eye. I felt dirty, unworthy of his love and trust. He noticed something was wrong, but attributed it to the stress of the renovation. He hugged me, kissed me, told me he loved me. Every word, every gesture was like a dagger in my heart. The following days were hell. I tried to keep my distance from Jake, but it was impossible to ignore the tension between us. Every look, every accidental brush, rekindled the fire of what we had shared. I hated myself for wanting him, for yearning for his touch, even while in Tom's arms. My story isn't over yet. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks. Back to the story. A week after our encounter, Jake and I found ourselves alone again. Tom had left town on a business trip, and I had spent the last few days in a state of constant anxiety, torn between desire and guilt. "Sarah," Jake said, his voice soft but intense. "We can't go on like this. What happened between us?" "Was a mistake," I interrupted, but my voice lacked conviction. "No," he insisted, moving closer. "It was real. What we feel is real. I know you're scared, that you feel guilty, but you can't deny what's between us." And he was right, I couldn't deny it. That night, we fell into each other's arms again, our passion even more intense than the first time. It was as if a dam had broken, releasing a torrent of repressed emotions and desires. Days turned into weeks, and our affair continued. We met in stolen moments, in hidden corners of the house, even once in his truck parked in a secluded spot. Each encounter was electric, passionate, filled with an intensity I had never experienced before. But with each moment of ecstasy, the guilt grew. I became an expert at lying, at Hiding, at pretending normalcy in front of Tom, every "I love you" I said to him felt like a betrayal. Every kiss a reminder of my infidelity. Jake began to talk about a future together. He painted me a picture of a life full of passion and adventure, so different from the stability and routine I had with Tom. Part of me longed for that life, that freedom, but another part clung to the security and love that Tom represented. Meanwhile, the house renovation was coming to an end. I knew I would soon have to make a decision. Would I stay with Tom, the man who had been my rock for so many years? Or would I risk it all for this new passion with Jake? The decision was taken out of my hands on a rainy afternoon. Tom came home early, soaked from the rain and with a smile on his face. "Surprise!" he exclaimed, showing me an envelope. "We're going on vacation. I booked a trip for us to celebrate the end of the renovation, and well, I have something important to ask you." My heart sank. I knew what that meant. Tom was going to propose. At that moment, the full gravity of my actions hit me hard. How could I do this to such a good, loving man? Before I could respond, Jake came out of the bathroom. There was a tense moment of silence as the three of us looked at each other. I saw the confusion in Tom's eyes, then understanding, and finally, pain. What's going on here?" he asked, his voice breaking. I couldn't speak. Tears ran down my cheeks as I looked from Tom to Jake and back. The silence said it all. "I'm sorry," Jake finally said. This is my fault." "No," I interrupted, finding my voice. "It's my fault, Tom. I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." What followed was an explosion of emotions. Tom yelled, cried, demanded explanations. Jake tried to defend me, which only made things worse. And I, in the middle of it all, felt like the worst person in the world. "How long?" Tom asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A few weeks," I answered, unable to look him in the eye. "Do you love him?" he asked, and the pain in his voice broke my heart. I couldn't answer. I didn't know the answer. Did I love Jake? Or was I just in love with the idea of him, with the excitement and novelty he represented? Tom nodded slowly, as if my silence was all the answer he needed. "I'm leaving," he said simply, turning around. "Tom, wait," I cried, but he was already at the door. He stopped for a moment, without turning. "I hope it's worth it, Sarah," he said in a broken voice. "I hope it's worth it, Sarah," he said in a broken voice. And with those words, Tom walked out of my life, leaving me in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The days that followed were a blur of tears, recriminations, and doubts. Jake tried to comfort me, but his presence only served to remind me of what I had lost. Our passion, which once burned so intensely, now seemed to be extinguishing under the weight of guilt and remorse. "We can get through this together," Jake would tell me, his eyes full of a hope that I no longer shared. "What we have is special, Sarah. It's worth fighting for." But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that what Jake and I had wasn't love, but an intense physical attraction and the excitement of the forbidden. Without the element of secrecy, without the adrenaline of doing something wrong, what did we really have left? A week after Tom left, I made a decision. "Jake," I told him, gathering all my courage, "this is over. What I did was wrong. I can't continue with this." I saw the pain in his eyes, the disbelief. "But Sarah, I thought we had something special." "What we had was a fantasy," I replied, feeling how each word tore me apart inside. "A beautiful, exciting fantasy, but it's not real. It's not a foundation on which to build a relationship." Jake tried to argue, tried to convince me that we could work, but I had already made my decision. I asked him to finish the renovation as soon as possible, and after that, to never contact me again. The following days were a hell of loneliness and self-reflection. Every corner of the house reminded me of Tom, of the life we had built together, and that I had destroyed in a moment of weakness. But it also reminded me of Jake, of the passion we had shared and the pain I had caused. I tried to contact Tom several times, desperate to explain myself, to ask for forgiveness. But he didn't answer my calls or my messages. His friends told me he had moved, that he needed time and space, I felt more alone than ever. It was in that moment of desperation when I decided I needed a radical change. I couldn't keep living in that house, surrounded by memories and remorse. I put the house up for sale, quit my job, and decided to move to another city to start over. The day before my departure, I received an unexpected call. It was Tom. "Hello, Sarah." His voice sounded tired, but I no longer detected the anger I had heard the last time we spoke. "Tom," I replied, my heart beating fast. I didn't expect you to call." There was a moment of silence before he spoke again. I needed time to process everything, to understand what happened, and I think I finally understand. "Tom, I'm so sorry," the words came out in a torrent. "I never meant to hurt you. It was a terrible mistake and I regret it every day." "I know," he interrupted gently, "and I believe you, but that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that you betrayed my trust." I felt tears running down my cheeks. "I know, and I understand if you can never forgive me." There was another long silence before Tom spoke again. "I forgive you, Sarah." His words left me breathless. "What?" "I forgive you," he repeated, "not because what you did was right, but because holding on to this resentment is destroying me. I need to forgive you to be able to move on with my life." I felt a mixture of relief and pain. His forgiveness was more than I deserved, but it also meant a definitive closure. "Thank you, Tom. That means a lot to me." "But Sarah," he continued, his voice becoming serious, "forgiving you doesn't mean we can go back to how we were before. That's over." I nodded, even though I knew he couldn't see me. "I understand and I accept that. I just want you to know how sorry I am and how much I loved you." "I loved you too, Sarah," he replied, and I could hear the pain in his voice. "But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes we make mistakes that can't be undone." After hanging up, I sat on the floor of my empty house and cried. I cried for the love I had lost, for the pain I had caused, for the life that could have been. But I also cried for the relief of being forgiven, even though I didn't deserve it. The next day, as I loaded my suitcases into the taxi that would take me to the airport, I took one last look at the house that had witnessed so much love and so much pain. I realized that this experience, as painful as it was, had taught me valuable lessons about love, loyalty, and the consequences of our actions. As the taxi drove away, I felt a mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for everything I had lost, but hope for the opportunity to start anew, to be a better version of myself. I didn't know what the future held for me, but I was determined to learn from my mistakes. I would never again take true love for granted, never again betray the trust of someone who loved me. And although the path to self-forgiveness would be long and difficult, I was willing to walk it as the plane took off, taking me towards my new life. I made a promise to myself I would honor Tom's forgiveness by living an honest and authentic life. And if I ever found love again, I would value and cherish it as the precious gift it is. My story of betrayal and redemption had come to an end, but my journey of growth and self-discovery was just beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with that